Hello and welcome to this episode of Talking Subs. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the fascinating topic of fast fashion and textiles. How can we build a greater circular economy here in Northern Ireland? And to go through this fascinating topic, we have an excellent panel assembled for you. We have Siobhan Purnell, who is one of our own members of staff here at Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. She is our Tackling Textiles Coordinator. We have Jaques, who is founder of HARU, and we have Mark Dowds, who is the CEO and founder at Responsible. You're all very welcome to this episode of Talking Subs.
Thank you very much,
just to
David.
start off with you, Siobhan, just to outline for us, why is this an issue? So if you're a policymaker, if you're interested in this topic, why is this something that we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, this is something that Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful have recently got involved with over the last, say, 18 months. And I think it's becoming more to the fore of how much fashion and textiles is affecting the environment. And according to RAP, it's now the fourth largest environmental impact after housing, food and transport. So it does have a major environmental impact. And I think people don't realise the way we consume and produce our clothes now is very different to what we did in the past. A lot of our clothes are made thousands of miles away from here. There's a lot of environmental issues in those countries and even human rights issues. We actually throw away an awful lot of our clothes now as well. So we're not keeping them for as long. So we're like over consuming and underusing our clothes. And in the UK, including Northern Ireland, we're getting rid of over 1 million tons of textile waste every year, and 300,000 of that is ending up in landfill. And this is also happening in Northern Ireland. And so I suppose it's part of this society that we've created. It's very disposable. It's like we've fallen out of love with our clothes, and that rather than repairing them or wearing them a bit longer, we're just thinking, oh, I'll just go and buy something new. And it's just sort of an opportunity now to take stock and say, is this the way we should be living? And so there's just opportunities now to look at this, and that's something that we're getting involved in and Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful.
Fantastic, thank you, Siobhan. Jaques, I'm going to go to you. Just explain this, HARU, what is it? And talk about some of the innovations and the innovative approach that you guys are taking towards this issue.
Yes, so HARU, which stands actually as an acronym for Help and Reuse. We are an end-to-end fashion resale company specializing in the digitization of secondhand products. So really, we're in the trenches of the fashion industry in the secondhand space. We're really looking to sort of make secondhand first choice for consumers. I think obviously Siobhan's already mentioned the impact that the fashion industry, and specifically fast fashion, which again, fast fashion, and I think a lot of consumers don't necessarily, there's crossing wires of what that is. Fast fashion is inexpensive clothing produced by sort of rapidly and mass market in response to fashion trends. So it's not necessarily just your standard piece of item. It's something that is produced constantly. I think there's now 52 fashion trends per year, which is a big change. We go from our sort of current, traditional seasons. So there's so much production. What we're trying to do at HARU is sort of help reduce the impact and change consumer behavior by bringing sort of secondhand products to the forefront, and really sort of trying to put that on par when it comes to sort of purchasing.
Fascinating, Jaques. And just before I move on to Mark, do you find that obviously this concept isn't widely shared across different sectors? Whenever you guys approach with your model, in terms of getting in stakeholders, do you find that there's a lot of buy-in to what you're trying to do?
Well, I think a lot of the sort of so we work with retailers that are selling secondhand, so they obviously understand the space, and I think Mark, who I know well, will discuss it as well. But there's lots of other people in this sort of fashion industry, retailers, brands, etc., who are looking at making their models more circular. And I think secondhand fashion obviously is a big part of that and has a big part to play in that. I do think that is something that I think the world we live in now and the activism that we're seeing around the fashion industry because of the impact that it's having is bringing something to the forefront. And I think we're at a point where change has to come and it's forcing that change. I do think there are a lot of question marks around how that change is going to come into play. And fashion as a sector is a very murky world. And it would sort of surprise you the amount of things that go on in the background when it comes to end of life of products and some of the brands, like what they do to those products. But yeah, no, I think there certain when it comes to sort of stakeholders understanding, it really depends in sort of the sector as to where they're coming from.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And Mark, just on to you. Just explain to us a wee bit about, what it is your organization does, and again, some of your experiences.
Yeah, so at Responsible, we work with fashion brands to help them to drive more circularity or to have their products in circulation for longer. And so we do that by helping them to control their secondary market. So that's, for a lot of brands, they spend a lot of money basically building up their brand, controlling their price on the primary sale, but then losing the opportunity on the secondary market. So they become a bystander instead of having to control that opportunity. So that's primarily what we do, is we help the brands to become more responsible and become accountable to Sustainable Development Goal 12, which is about responsible consumption and production.
Okay. And Mark, in terms of actually how, again, similar question I asked Jaques, is how do you actually find, approaching people about this? Because, often, as Siobhan was pointing out in her open comments there, a lot of people don't often understand the impacts of fast fashion. People think, well, they're buying clothes and they're just throwing them out. What could the impact of that be? How are you finding, people engaging with that?
Yeah, I think it's a very fast growing market, and when it comes to the customer themselves, but for the brands are beginning to waken up as well. So it's rapidly growing. It's the fastest growing part of the fashion industry at the moment, and growing multiple year on year.
Okay, and Siobhan, just back to you on just kind of the wider piece, because obviously a big part of what we're looking at here is how we get policymakers kind of to take action and how we get people to kind of listen. So Siobhan, in your experience, I know you've been with the organization now for, I think, just over 2 years now in doing this role. What is it we need to see from policymakers?
Well, I think potentially there needs to be some changes in the law. We need to work with the retailers and look at potentially extended producer responsibility, where they take responsibility for what happens to the product at the end of life. As Jaques said, there's different models out there of how clothing and textiles are being handled. So potentially policymakers need to look at legislation. And I know there is a lot of work going on across the UK with RAP through Textiles 2030, which is a voluntary scheme at the moment, but potentially it's preparing the sector for changes in legislation. And I also think locally it's really having that education piece, so supporting education and arming our consumers with the right sort of knowledge and understanding of what they're buying, how they're buying it, how they're getting rid of it, because our message is very simple, and it's very much, never put your unwanted clothes in the bin. We've just kept it really simple. It's keeping it, keep it in use, reuse, repair, reimagine, and it's supporting us to get that message out to more people. And the reuse, as it's fantastic to have Mark and Jaques here today, because that's where they're in that market, they're in that world of reuse. And we carried out research recently, and while a lot of people are donating to charity and they're using that as a way of moving on their product, only 17% said that they regularly buy secondhand or pre-loved. But there was an openness from the people we spoke to think about buying secondhand. So I think it's supporting people like Jack and Mark to really support that secondhand world, to keep that circular economy operating. And if we're going to hit net zero by 2050, and all of the things that we have to do, we really need to start to look at organizations like Jack and Mark are doing to really make this happen and make it a movement. And it's so great to hear that they're seeing a demand for it, and they're in this space and they're going to make things happen. But as I say, from the research we found, there is an appetite for people, but it's just getting them to, within Northern Ireland, to make that change and think secondhand, pre-loved rather than brand new, because there's so much good quality material and clothing out there. Okay, and Jack, just on that, in terms of the challenges you're facing, I mean, what could policymakers locally here do, make it easier for you to grow what you're trying to do, increase the circular economy? What kind of challenges are you facing out there that potentially could be tackled?
I mean, I think there's obviously like looking at the production on the sort of retail side. So I think like sort of oversight and accountability are like two big words that really, and Mark and Siobhan have already mentioned that when it comes to the production. Even right now, when you buy a clothing item, you can see what it's made of, but there's really no extensive detail about the impact that item has had on the environment, the way that it's been produced, like where it's been produced, what specifically has gone into that production process. And I think there's lots of sectors where we are seeing, you see more accountability, you see more oversight, even like, food labels now. There's requirements to put down the breakdown. There's no such requirements when it comes to fashion. So I think on the production side, when it comes to the challenges on our side, I think, like one big thing, like I think what underpins, like especially fast fashion, which is, again, there's a difference between mass production of clothing and fast fashion. Fast fashion is specific producers that are doing it to suit, they're building trends, and they're really to some extent exploiting consumer behavior. And I think there has to be, how we challenge that and tackle that is changing consumer behavior, because that really underpins, like, if fast fashion wouldn't be a problem if there wasn't people buying the products. So I think on that side, it's as much as we possibly can do across businesses, across, working with the government, working with the brands to try and, really open the eyes of the consumers. And I think, again, if you understand, part of that is understanding what you're currently doing, what you're currently buying, and also then what the alternatives are. And okay, secondhand is a big, we're consumption and production right now. There's more textiles than everybody needs in the world. And that means that there's a lot of products that are going to be, secondhand. As Siobhan said, already people are getting rid of products potentially after 7-8 wears. The lifetime of a product is sort of down, I think, like half what it used to be 15 years ago in somebody's wardrobe. So there's lots of secondhand products, and it's trying to really make people think about the alternatives to what they're buying, because there are, again, affordable alternatives. I think, so when you look at why people are buying secondhand, affordability is a big reason. And I think that's also a big reason when it comes to fast fashion. Again, there are plenty of very low price items, but obviously that secondhand, the impact that has versus buying new is absolutely huge. So I think it's really trying to raise the profile of alternatives, not just even, there are other alternatives out there than just like sort of secondhand products. Again, even looking at sustainably produced products. And, there's lots of other models, like when it comes to rental or sharing, wardrobe sharing and things like that. But really trying to promote the alternatives and also push for more oversight, I think from our perspective, would have a huge impact on changing, which again, I think is, changing that consumer behavior. And I think that unlocks a lot of the puzzle then.
Brilliant. And Mark, same question to you then, in terms of challenges, what could be done or what would you like to see happen? Not just at a local level, but we can also scale that up in terms of to really drive this issue forward and make progress.
Yeah, I think from a policy perspective, it's helping brands to become accountable for what they manufacture. So, to give you an example, we've got a population today of what, 9 million, or 8-9 billion in the world. We produce 100 billion items of fashion clothes every year. So there's massive overproduction. The majority of fast fashion brands also are they order, and basically one of the biggest issues is on the front end. Only about 75% of what most of the manufacture actually gets sold, and then they've got issues of what they get rid of, what they do on the other side of it. Shein or Shine, whatever the Shein is, are slightly different. I mean, they are super fast fashion. They're the sort of the biggest player now, and shipping in. Although they basically, I think they're able to shift about 95% of all they do. So they've solved the front end problem. The problem is they're shipping stuff and flying it in from China. And so you've got all the carbon footprint that comes with that as well. So it's and then you've got brands that will manufacture with mixed fibers and so on, and they're not really thinking about end of life. And so whenever we then buy something that and we're done with it, we either some people will sell it on a Depop or something, and then or else we dump it off at a charity shop. We realize only 10% of the things that we dump off are actually sold. 90% of that is then baled and shipped into other parts of the world. It's traded and sort of ruins in some ways many economies, and the stuff that's not sold ends up in landfill with in foreign countries, which it's sort of like out of sight, out of mind for us. But in the same way, we share the same planet, and this planet will live forever. We're the ones that are going to die. It'll rejuvenate itself, but if we actually want to have a place where we can effectively live and enjoy for a long time, we need to waken up to our behaviors in that, because if the brands continue to overproduce, we will continue to overconsume. And then, but in some ways, as Jaques said, the problem's us, actually. We're the ones that, we go out, and I still talk to friends of mine, and they'll go out and tell me about they got a good deal on the weekend, got a t-shirt for $5. And I said, you ever considered, about the person who made that t-shirt and how much they're making? So all these, it's such a murky one. As Jack had mentioned, it's hard to get a handle on. It's super complex, because you can hammer Shein for what they're doing on one area, but they've solved the problem on the front end that a lot of the other big brands are not doing. So from a policy perspective, we really do need governments to lay down accountabilities, because otherwise the capital markets will just keep driving for for continuous growth and upon these brands. And what they need to do is to recognize, if they can participate in the secondary market, manufacture less, they can also make more money. And then auto manufacturers have proven this a long time ago.
Okay, thanks very much for that overview. Mark, Siobhan, I'm going to go back around to you again as we go into kind of the home stretch on this, because Mark and Jaques have talked about this here as well. As a society, we're all consumers, and a big part of our messaging is about the power that we have as individuals to bring about change. Just on that, what do we need to do as a society, do you think, Siobhan, to tackle the growing textile and clothing waste problem?
Well, I think as some of the comments there, it's around education. So I think part of that is, talking to people about this, making it more aware. That was something that came out of our research when we asked people to rank what was the big environmental issues of the day. They had global warming, they had plastic pollution, they had fossil fuels. Textiles was at the very bottom, and people don't make the link that most of our clothing, or a lot of our clothing, is made from plastic derived from the fossil fuel industry. So while they understood the plastic problem, because they had that David Attenborough moment 4 years ago with the Blue Planet, they haven't had that moment with fast fashion. I don't think it is starting to, and of course I'm in this world and I think everybody thinks like me, but you soon realize when you're talking to friends and family that they don't, but like what Mark was saying. So I think education, talking about it more, having this opportunity to talk like with these guys and yourself, David, and get that out there, that get this message out, that we really want people to think about what they buy. If they love a certain brand, find out about that brand, ask them how are they making their clothes, what are they, who's making them, where are they making them, and make it a sort of an informed choice rather than just blindly following the marketing, because they spend serious amounts of money on the communications. We'll never compete with them on that level. These guys are so experienced and slick at the communications and getting people to buy, that we need to counter that with arming people with more information. And we're working with schools. We've got a fast fashion workshop going into local primary schools. We're working with universities in terms of our local university, in terms of talking to the new fashion designers coming out and talking about sustainability. And we're trying to talk to the general public as well about those simple messages of never put your unwanted clothes in the bin, reuse, repair, reimagine, and encouraging people to use opportunities like Jaques and Mark have with their organisations. So I think for me, it would be the education side.
Okay, and Jaques, same question to you. As a society, I mean, whenever you're out, when consumers are approaching you, what's the message to them about how they can, how they have real power in this?
I mean, yeah, like you said, it's 100%. They have all the power. I mean, I do think outside of like the consumer, there are certainly like, sort of government and policy issues that I think there has to be a hardcore, there has to be measures put in place that limit the impact, like on the sort of fast fashion, going back to specifically again fast fashion brands, like because of the demand and what they're trying to do in their business models, it requires fast production, and that is what it's that production and that is sort of extensive production that has a huge environmental impact. And there's a quote around fast fashion, fast fashion isn't free, somebody somewhere is paying. So it's not just the environmental impact, it's, as Mark said, it's the sort of social impact, the fact that there's low wage workers in poor sort of environments. So I think there are things that like really, if we were to put sort of stringent policy in place that limited the impact you could have, it would limit the number of fashion cycles that brands can go through. There is always going to be the demand for mass market. And I think to some extent, it's the acceptance that consumer behavior isn't going to change overnight. It's not, tomorrow isn't going to be a completely new day. There's still going to be the existence of those brands. But I think, again, on the consumer change, and it's opening the eyes to alternatives. Again, it doesn't necessarily always have to be secondhand. It can be buying new, it can be buying from more sustainable brands. Not all clothing production is fast fashion. It's still possible to produce, in mass and do it better. And there are brands out there that are doing that. There will still be impacts, but those impacts are a lot less. And I think it's the realization that really the people here that are having the worst impact are the fast fashion companies who are, exploiting the consumers. But yeah, I think it's the education piece when it comes to consumers. It's realizing partly from the secondhand side of it and the industry we're in, it's there has maybe been sort of assumptions around secondhand, and I certainly like different generations buy into secondhand a lot more. Like for example, like Gen Z are really leading the way in that front. Not always necessarily from the environmental perspective that people think. It's really and that's where consumer behavior. That's how you change it. Sometimes it's from brand like marketplaces like Depop that would be predominantly that sort of Gen Z led. They have changed, and they're driving secondhand shopping, which I think has a great environmental impact, but they're doing that by doing what the fast fashion brands are doing and generating trends and marketing and buzz. And that changes again, it's playing them at their own game to some extent, and it's making sure that secondhand buying secondhand there is no sort of for consumers, they feel it is as easy and as acceptable to buy secondhand as it is to buy new. And to some degree, that means fitting into some of those trends, making it and playing, like I say, playing them at their own game, but also, helping people understand the impact that they're having and the good that they're doing by shopping secondhand, and making sure that, they're being responsible with their own wardrobes. I think if everybody bought, a couple of more items each year secondhand than they do now, it would be a huge impact globally. So those little small changes can have, it's the same message that was shared when it came to things like food waste, etc. Those little tiny changes that we can all do every day in our own wardrobes that will have a huge impact across the board.
Okay, fantastic. Mark, same question to you. Jaques was talking there about opening the eyes of the consumers. So again, what would your message be to consumers about how, as a society, we can tackle this problem?
Yeah, I'd say if you don't need it, don't buy it. And which because highlight people that we have a massive waste problem in our world. What Jack and I are working on, and others are. It's not like we're not diverting stuff from landfill. There's an idea out there that sort of circularity diverts everything from landfill. That's absolute rubbish. All we're doing is kicking the can down the road and trying to solve a problem at the moment. Every product that is manufactured will have an end of life, and that's the part we need to waken up to, because we need to slow down our consumption. We need to buy once and wear it for longer. That's we need to buy things that can stay in trend or are out of trend, but something that you can know that you're not going to throw away. If we buy cheap, we'll dispose of it because we don't care for it. So a lot of people would say, well, I can't afford to buy some of the better brands. Well, that's what Jack and I do. I mean, that's what we help others. You can come to us and you can buy some of the best brands you would ever want for about half the price of what you'll pay, in a store. And that stuff will last, 5 times longer than what all the cheap stuff that you're buying. So you can actually be trendier by participating in the secondary market. And it's again, and a lot of the stuff is getting upcycled as well. So it's unique and all those things that come with it. So I just say, buy less, because that's the only way we're going to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much for that. And just last question it's going to be to you, Jaques and Mark. I'm always just intrigued, just listening to the two of you, about what motivated you to actually set this up, because this isn't an area that a lot of people think about, as Siobhan's research has found. So, Jaques, what actually motivated you to get into this field, into this market, into this area?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, where we are right now, I would say, has been an evolution to some degree. There's been lots of pivots to get where we are, but from the very start, my co-founder of my current company, HARU, we've actually sort of been in this sort of secondhand market now, secondhand fashion, for probably about 12 years. We set up our first business together in school, and it was purely out of from a hobby. Like we both were in sort of really interested in what we would have called vintage clothing. Now, my dad always argued that it wasn't vintage because he used to wear it. So, but we had a massive sort of passion, and a lot of that we would have purchased secondhand. So we would have trawled through charity shops and secondhand stores, trying to find items. And I think from that, it really opened our eyes to the secondhand market, to also to fashion industry as well. Because I think when you get into the sort of secondhand space, you start looking at the impact that buying new, etc. has. And I think it's really been an evolution since that point. But that was our sort of entry point. It was, again, like I sort of say, consumer behavior. We weren't necessarily, I'll be honest and say, when we were 16, my eyes weren't opened to the environmental impacts. We were doing it because it was a trendy thing to do, and we liked the sort of that was something that was really popular at that point. sort of 90s sportswear brands and sweatshirts, etc. And we've really never left. So yeah, that was the access point.
Right. Okay, fascinating story. I mean, that I wasn't doing that at 16, Jaques. So you're way ahead of me. Mark, same question to you. What motivated you to get into this field?
Number one, I care for the environment. And my previous startup was in InsurTech, and so a lot of folks are asking, how on earth did you move from InsurTech into fashion? But when I was speaking around the world about the future of insurance and the future of financial services, what I was beginning to tell people is that the future, our financial service infrastructure in our world will fall apart if we don't get preventative with the environment. Because if you think about it, the things that basically insurance companies mainly exist for is to mop up all our mess. So if we have and the things that sort of wipe them out: fires, floods, and disease, and that's all being caused by our consumption. And so the reason I got into this was ultimately that if we don't start to prevent what we're doing on our planet, we will get wiped out, and our lives are not going to be as comfortable at all. And certainly the next generation won't have an opportunity. So I realized I can't sit on the other side of the fence earning a lot of money doing something else when there's a massive environmental problem that needs solved right away. So it was purely for purpose and mission to solve something for our environment.
That's two really fascinating stories. And again, both are doing phenomenal work. So delighted to be able to host you on Talking Subs today. You have been watching Siobhan Purnell, Jaques Hill, and Mark Dowds. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Talking Subs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Talking Subs. Please remember to hit the subscribe button so that you can keep up to date with all future episodes from this series. Thank you for watching.